Okay, hello guys. Right, so today we are going to look at what happened in one of the countries in the Iron Curtain behind that Eastern Bloc, a place called Hungary. And we're going to look at what happened in 1956. Now, this is a really, really important moment for Hungary. I'm not going to explain too much why now because I want you to be excited and keep watching. But let's just think about where we're up to in terms of this Cold War. So we've looked at the Cold War in Asia. We've looked at the kind of the little sub-conflicts that go on over a length of time, like the arms race and the space race. And now we're going to have a look at some of these isolated incidents, which were really high points of tension because the world is kind of watching to see what will happen. Will the US react? Will the USSR react? And in particular with Hungary, it's kind of used as a test case, an example of what would happen to any country that had an uprising or tried to leave the Warsaw Pact and the Iron Curtain, essentially. So that's why kind of Hungary and how Hungary fits into what we're doing. Now, remember, this whole course is called the Cold War, and a Cold War is where no real conflict takes place. There's no actual shooting and fighting between the two sides. This is opposed to a hot war where we have actual fighting. Now, just because America and the USSR don't have fighting with each other, that doesn't mean that there isn't any conflict that goes on in this whole process. And when we look at Hungary, we need to be very aware that Hungary engage in street fighting, essentially, kind of almost like a rebel movement, a revolution, an uprising against the USSR. And there is real violence there. It's just the USA aren't involved, which is why it's part of the Cold War. Okay, so the first thing we need to know, I am in the streets of Hungary, by the way, if you were wondering where I am visiting on today's trip. But the first thing we need to know is really the background of Hungary, okay? Why is it even communist in the first place? Okay, so when we trace Hungary's communist history, I thought it'd be really interesting just to take you back to this moment. Now, in 1919, a very small and very short-lived rump state, as we call it. So it's not the whole country of Hungary, it's a small part of Hungary. Like if you imagine a rump steak is a small part of the whole animal. A small part of Hungary have this mini revolution and become the Republic of Councils in Hungary, okay? Now this is the very first official communist state in Hungary, and it's the second communist country in the whole world after Russia itself, where the revolution started in 1917. So Hungary really does have quite a legacy with communism. They were the first country to have a group of people follow in Lenin's footsteps. Lenin helped worked very closely with the Hungarian communists to try and aid this transition. So it does have a history of being tied up with communism. Now, unfortunately for this rump state, it only contained 23% of Hungary's population and territory anyway. And secondly to that, it only lasts 133 days. So it does not last a consistent length of time. And then we go back to having Hungary as it was before. Okay, so there is one very small rump state in 1919 that lasts 133 days. Right, guys, I forgot to mention that statue I was standing in front of. That's the statue, the memorial to that republic. I'm now in front of some Red Army soldiers because the next stage in Hungary's journey is the end of the Second World War. Now, after the Second World War, Hungary is within Stalin's sphere of influence. Red Army soldiers are stationed in Hungary and they don't leave Hungary when it's liberated from Germany. So it comes under those countries that we see in Stalin's sphere of influence and in the Eastern Bloc. Now, he wants to allow elections to take place, and he leaves the army in Hungary to try and create a coercive, which means a forceful force. So to use coercion, to use force, to try and ensure these elections go the way that he wants it. Now, we can understand, can't we, that the way that he wants it would obviously be for a communist party to win these elections. The Red Army are stationed there, they use coercion. However, The Hungarian Communist Party only wins 17% of the votes. Not very good result for the Kremlin, for Stalin. It didn't go the way he planned. He hasn't got control of Hungary. Instead, we have a coalition force who come to power. Now, technically, if Stalin left it there, Hungary probably would never have become communist. They have quite a small minority of seats in terms of political power. 17% isn't a particularly huge number. Okay, now I haven't gone mad. I haven't decided I fancy some, some little charcuterie meats. I'm not hungry, it's not lunchtime. There is a reason for this. What the Soviet Union do next to try and regain control of this political situation is what we call salami tactics. Now, it's a bit of a strange word, isn't it? And these are kind of tactics to try and divide and conquer. And the idea is that over time, you begin to gain control and dominate a political landscape. So eventually, the Soviet Union is able to influence and intervene with force, and they manage to kind of create a puppet government in power. And so we have communists now in very important positions. We don't need to know the details of how and what they do. You might want to remember it's called salami tactics, and it's just dividing, conquering, forcing, intimidating people out, things like that, until the communists had a stronger hold of the political situation and communists have been put in positions of power. And then by this point, we have a puppet government, a government that we can control like puppets on a string. Once the communists have this control, once they have control of this puppet coalition government, once they have people in positions of power, they begin to introduce severe restrictive measures. They even go so far as banning the coalition government that has won democratic power. So they've gone in and they've quite literally taken from this election the fair democratic results that the Hungarian people voted for. And they've said, no, we're going to ban these people entirely from leading the country. So if you're looking for evidence of Stalin using force to kind of control a country inside the Eastern Bloc, Hungary is a really good example. So they're using these severe restrictive measures, and they also put in this guy. I've got a picture of him here, nice and close up for you. And I've got a picture of him here talking at a conference. His name is Rakosi. I think I'm pronouncing that right, Rakosi, probably not. But anyway, spelled Rakosi. He's given leadership of Hungary, and he is loyal to the USSR. Okay, and through him they declare the People's Republic of Hungary in 1949. So by this point, from the end of the war in 45 to 49, Hungary goes through this transition. They have democratic elections. They don't want to be a communist country. They only win 17% of the votes. And yet by 1949, 4 years later, a communist party and a communist leader loyal to the USSR is in control. Okay. Now, they create a secret police very quickly, and Moscow, Stalin, the USSR has a very tight grip on Hungary. Opposition is dealt with very swiftly. Soviet soldiers are permanently stationed in the country, and it very quickly becomes that kind of state that we talked about all those weeks ago when we looked at what communism even means. And we thought about how communism means, you know, a secret police, quite restrictive measures, censorship, kind of a terror surrounding everything. And Hungary's lost a lot of its autonomy. Autonomy means freedom to rule yourself, because they're kind of being ruled by the USSR through the puppet of Rakosi. So lots of people understandably feel quite a strong resentment towards the USSR for their involvement in Hungary. We begin to see Soviet communist history being taught in schools rather than Hungarian. Communism also bans religious practices, and Hungary is a really strongly Catholic country. And one person who kind of falls foul, is a victim to this whole process, is this man. He is Cardinal Mindszenty, very, very highly placed popular figure within the Catholic religion. He is imprisoned for kind of speaking out and for continuing with his religious practices. So I've got a picture over here of his arrest. And people are highly resentful towards all of this process. Now, in this process as well, 7,000 people are purged from government. The secret police forcibly relocate thousands to take their property and allow people from the Communist Party to live there instead. 26,000 people relocate from Budapest and move elsewhere. Many of them are also deported to labor camps. Okay, so it's a really difficult time for Hungary. They have essentially gone through what we might call, a secondary occupation, not from the Germans, but from the Soviet Union. And it becomes very clear very quickly that anybody who is willing to challenge this government will be imprisoned and will be tortured by this very prevalent, this very present secret police on the Hungarian streets. Right, this kind of brings us in the time period back to an event we've looked at before. So I'm standing in front of a man you should recognize, and this is Khrushchev. Now, if you remember, in 1953, Stalin dies of a stroke, and he is replaced by Nikita Khrushchev, who takes kind of control of Russia or the USSR. And as we know, he also suggested more of a peaceful coexistence approach, and that's going to be really important in a moment. So Stalin dies in 1953, and we begin a process called De-Stalinization. This kind of suggests to countries, especially those in the Warsaw Pact from 1955, who have been bound to the Soviet Union through that of which Hungary is one of those countries, it suggests to them there might be a change in the regime, and we might have less terror and more tolerance. Perhaps some of these countries can start to govern themselves. Most of them kind of, expect and understand that they may have to stay within communism, but they might be able to have their own style of communism, form their own governance of communism, rather than it all being dictated from above and kind of governed and directed from above, and having, the USSR's secret police in the country itself. So this is a very, very important moment, secret speech and the de-Stalinization from Khrushchev, because it gives these countries a little glimmer of hope. And what hope can do sometimes in the minds of, if we look at history, especially younger people, students, university students, sometimes that hope can get a little bit out of control and can cause them to start to uprise or say, this isn't right. And that's exactly what happens. Okay, so the de-Stalinization and the peaceful coexistence has inspired a group of people to stand up against the Warsaw Pact. Now, any bright sparks amongst you might have realised that this doesn't actually look like Hungarian writing, and that's true. It's because we're in Poland. So before we look at Hungary, we have to look at a small event that happens in Poland. In 1956, an uprising by Polish workers occurs in Poland, and scores of protesters take to the streets and protest. Many of them are killed. However, the government in Poland does appoint a reformist communist called Gomułka. Again, I've probably pronounced that wrong. And his demands are listened to and adhered to. And the Poles win some very, very impressive concessions against a strict, oppressive communism. Okay, so in Poland they have an uprising and it's successful. They don't win huge concessions. It's not, life-changing. It's not state-changing, but they win small things that they protest for, and everyone's happy and everyone kind of goes home and it's over and done with. But this is seen as an inspiration because, people in Hungary watch this and think, well, they did it in Poland. They got away with it in Poland. Maybe we can get away with it here, and maybe we can lose some of that total control that the USSR have over us. So that the uprising in Poland is very much the inspiration for what's about to happen in Hungary. So in the same year as Poland, we're in October, to be very precise, the 23rd of October 1956. Students take to the streets of Budapest. They want greater freedom, they want civil rights, and they call for the removal of Rákosi as their leader. They instead want to appoint this man. Now, his name is Imre Nagy, and they want him to return to government. He's already been in government once before, and he was sent away. He was expelled from the country because he's more of a reformist communist politician. Okay, he wants more reformist policies, a bit closer, I guess, to kind of capitalist ideas, but kind of retaining some of that communist essence. So he's more reformist. He's not so hard-lined and strict as the USSR perhaps wanted. So they want Nagy to come back and lead the country again. They want the Soviet troops to be removed. and they want to remove some of the restrictions and the oppression that they are experiencing in Hungary. Now, it begins as a peaceful protest, but this peaceful protest ends up with 200,000 people on the streets. And this very, very quickly descends into kind of a chaotic, large-scale demonstration with violence becoming very, very widespread. Now, to my left, we've got a picture of Stalin's head on the ground. Now, you know, that's obviously a statue that's been pushed over and destroyed. It shows the anger of the people to this situation that they're in, and hatred they feel for this control by the Soviet Union. Very quickly, Soviet tanks are set alight. The protesters take over many government buildings, kind of, you know, burning papers and things like that, taking control of government buildings. And this leads the Soviet tanks to start opening fire on some of the protesters. Nagy is declared prime minister, and he kind of surprises the people slightly by asking them to kind of calm down and show loyalty towards the Hungarian Communist Party. He promises them reforms and some freedoms, but he says, you know, we need to stop this because too many people are going to get hurt. So let's calm down, you know, go home. I will give you what you want. And he does follow through, and very quickly he announces a new government, including non-Communist Party members. He releases some of the political prisoners, for example, Cardinal Mindszenty, the Catholic leader, are released from prison. And people see this as him following through, and kind of a really nice and good, significant moment in Hungarian political leadership. They've kind of unshackled themselves from the Soviet Union. And at this point, everything looks really good for Hungary, and that it looks like the uprising was a success. Okay, so I'm just going to leave you these notes here for a moment. So if you did want to just put down any of those key pieces of information, you've got them written out there, so you didn't miss any of the key names or numbers or spellings. So pause the video if you want to jot those down.